warm welcome to what is sure to be another very special Harcourts Rata and Co-auction number 2, Geoffrey Street in Thomastown. My name is Robert Ozzimo and I proudly represent the company of Harcourts Rata and Co. I'm joined here today by some of my award-winning team in blue, the best team in the north. Should you require their advice, please feel free to approach either Rob, Claudia, Michael, and of course, Mr. Thomastown himself, Mario Tucci, who I'm sure you've met throughout the marketing campaign. Boys, let me share with you the following announcements, which in place help you bid and buy with absolute confidence here today. The auction will be conducted in accordance with the rules, and any additional conditions are made available for inspection before the start of the auction. The auction rules prevent an auctioneer from accepting bids or offers for property after the property has been knocked down to the successful bidder. The vendors have a reserve price as the auctioneer will indicate bidders on request. The law prohibits false bids, prohibits major disruptions by bidders, and prohibits bidders attempting to prevent others from bidding, and provides for fines for such conduct. The rules permit for vendor bids. The words I'll use during the auction to indicate that I'm making a bid on behalf of the vendor are vendor bid, and by law only I, as the auctioneer, can make a vendor bid. The contract of sale has been on display prior to today's auction. We call for 10% deposit upon the fall of the hammer and the signing of that contract to take place here today, with the balance to be paid at settlement in a flexible 30 to 90 days time, at which time the vendor will provide the lucky buyer with vacant possession of the property. Quite a straightforward document, everything's in there, everything's quite clear. So buyers, it was my highest recommendation what we offer fee consideration and competition here today. We often talk about central locations, but it hardly gets more central than where we find ourselves standing here today. Number 2, Geoffrey, in the very heart of Thomastown, with access to everything that makes us Thomastown such a wonderful place to live and invest in. Walking distance to Thomastown Station, walking distance to High Street shopping, walking distance to Station Street and May Road shopping, all at your fingertips around the corner. Easy access to the Western Ring Road, providing simple access throughout the city. Plenty of options when it comes to schooling, and a plethora of parkland in the surrounding streets. The property itself, immaculately maintained over the years. They hardly build them like this anymore. The current owners have lived here, I think, since new. So one owner, and just consider how long the next opportunity will be before it's available again. So today marks your chance, your opportunity to get the salt sticker up on the board. If that is your goal, buyers, right now is your chance to reserve that right. Where can I see a fair and reasonable starting bid for 2, Geoffrey? Who'd like to start us off? I don't mind the call. I'm in your hands, buyers. This is your moment. This is your time. At 650,000, I love an optimist. I'm going to go with, yeah, 650, sir. At 650,000, perhaps throw me off to 7. At 650,000. At 650,000, fairly been offered now. 650 the bid. There's the bid. Easy buying at that at $650,000 now. At 650,000 now, looking for 700 in the rise at 650 the bid. At 650, at 690, I'll short of my stride a little bit for you and get you involved at 90. Welcome and best of luck here today. At 690,000, the bid's there. At 690,000, fairly been offered now. At 690,000, bids there. Opportunity with you. At 700,000, I'll short of my stride once more at 700,000, and the same courtesy of both sides at 10. At 700,000, make it 710 in the rise. At 700,000, even money bids there. 710 now, 710,000. At 710,000, bid there against you, sir, at 10. At 710,000. At 710,000, at 20 now, and welcome back at 20. At 720 the bid. At 720,000. At 720 the bid, sir. You still with me? Definitely done. Thank you for your bid here today. At 20 now. At 720,000, fairly been offered 30 if you like. At 30 now, 30 got. At $730,000 the bid. At 730 the bid, 40, or perhaps just take me to 50. At 730,000 the bid's there. At 730,000 bid there. Opportunity with you now. At 730 the bid. Once, 730,000 done. Twice. 40. At 40, at 740 now. At 740, it's got to be 7.5 and 50 got. At 750 the bid now. At 750,000. At 750,000, 60 if you like. At 750 the bid. At 750,000 bid there. 750 opportunity with you. It's at 750, it's against your bid. At 50 now. At 750,000, fairly been offered once. At 750,000 all done. At 60 now, and I would think so, at 760. At 760,000, still done. At 760 now. At 770. At 770 the bid. At 770,000, fairly been offered now. At 770 the bid. At 770,000, bid there. Opportunity here, 80 got. At 780 now. At $780,000. At 780 the bid. At 780,000, bid there. What do you say? 780,000 now.
90.
At 90 got now. 790,000 and 800 beckons now. At 800,000 even money at 8. At 800,000 now. At 800 the bid. The bid's there. Ma'am, the bid's there. Sold the keys. We're on the market. We sell here today at $800,000 the bid. Bid there. Keys are there. We're selling. If you're waiting for me to go inside and seek instructions, 801 at 801,000, at 805 the quick retort at 805, at 6 now at 806,000, 806 and 7, at 806,000, at 806,000 bid there. 808, 8089 at 809 now, at 809,000. We're on the market and selling at 809,000. The bid's there, the keys are there. It's a late run at 809 and 10 got. At 815,000 across the road at 815 at 16 now. At 816,000. At 816,000, 3 still in it at 816. At 20 now at 821. At 821 the quick retort at 21 and the bid's there, make it 25. At 21 I have. At 821,000. At 821,000 bid here. At 25 and 26. At 826 the bid. At 826,000. You've got to be quick, sir. At 826. Give me 30 now. Quick. At 826. At 826,000 bid there. At 826. At 30 got. 30's here. At 830,000. 31. At 831,000 now. At 831 the bid. At 831,000 fairly been offered now. Here at 831. We're on the market. We're selling. The bids there. The keys are there. 832 now. At 3. At 833. At 34. At 40, even better, at 840 now, 41, at 841, at 841 the bid, at 841,000, no half-time break here today, not going inside, not seeking instructions. My instructions have been sought and given, and 50 now, at 51, at $851,000, and we sell away here today if there's no better bid. At 851 the bid's there, the keys are there, we're selling, $851,000 the bid. Once, at 851 all done. At 3 now at 853, 4 at 854, at 854, at 854,000 bid back here at 854 the bid, at 854,000 we're selling, at 855 now at 856 now at 856, at 856,000 give me 60 if you like, at 856,000 bid me now or forever hold your peace because we sell, 856 the bid, first call at 856 all done, second call at 60 now. At 860, 61, at 861, at 861,000, at 861,000 bid back here, keys back here, on the market, selling 63, 64, at 64. Bet quick, sir. Give me one quickly at 864. Can I say 65 or 65? Got. We're keys with you in 6 at 866 the bid. At 866,000 fairly been offered now. At 866,000 on the market selling. We play for keeps. 870 now at 71. At 871,000. At 871,000 that dependable one. At 871 the bid. At 871,000 fairly been offered now. 871 the bid. Best response to a small bid's always a big one at 73, 74. At 874 now, at 874 the bid, at 874,000 fairly been offered now at 874 bid there, keys there, opportunity here and there across the road. You're definitely still out. At 874,000, 80 now, 81, at $881,000 the bid, at 881 the bid, at 881,000 bid there, keys there, opportunity back with you. Are we done over there? Definitely done. Thank you very much for your bidding here today. 881,000. 83 now and 84. At 884,000. At 884,000. Fairly been offered now at 884. At 884,000. Something tells me 900 might be the limit over here. If it is, you want to get there first at 884. At 884,000. Fairly been offered. At $884,000. Bids here. Keys are here. We're on the market. We're selling. Not going inside. We play for keeps. 886. 87 at 887,000 at 887,000 inching ever closer to that 9 now at 887 the bid at 887,000 the bid's there now at 887 at $887,000 the bid. 890 now, 91 at 891,000 at 891,000 fairly been offered now at 891 the bid at 891,000 bid here, keys here on the market selling 891 the bid. First call at 891,000 and a half, 891 and a half and 92 at 892,000 at 892,000 fairly been offered, got them down to $1,500 bids. Now's the time to ramp it up at 892 the bid at 892,000 fairly been offered now at 892. 892 the bid. Bids here, keys here on the market selling. 892, proudly been offered once at 892. Done. Twice, 892,000. Done and finished. Third, final call.
893.
3.5, 893 and a half at 893,500 now at 893 and a half at 893,500 the bid now at 893 and a half, bidding ones the whole time, got them down to halves now at 893 and a half, bid there 894 and a half at 894 and a half at 894,500 at 894.5 and the bid's there 895 now at 895 at 895,000. And a half, 895 and a half. At 8, I had to remind him to bid for once. At 895,500. First time you missed one, sir. At 895 and a half now. At 895,500. Bids there, keys are there. On the market selling. 895 and a half. At 6 now and a half. At 896 and a half. Take me to 900. See if it does the trick. 897 now and a half. At 897 and a half. 897,500. Bid there, keys there. We sell 897 and a half. Once. 8 now at 98 and 98 and a half at 898,500. Bid back here, my left, your right. Opportunity with you at 898 and a half at 98 and a half now. 900,000 even money and a half wasn't to be at 900 and a half at 900.5 now at $900,500 the bid at 900 and a half for the first call at 900. 901 might be the limit, man. At 900 and 500 there at 900 and a half at 900 and a half, fairly been offered once at 900 and a half, all done. At 900,500, twice, done and finished. Third, final call at 900,500, all done, finished. Silent out at 900,000 and a half. Bid there, keys there. Do I have your absolute best here today? Yep. Definitely done. Thank you very much for your spirit of being here today. I hope we enjoy success together next time we meet at 900 and a half. Bids here, keys here. We're done there, sir. Done over there at 900 and a half. First call at 900,500. All done. Twice at 900 and a half. Done. Finished. Third, final call. $900,500 the bid. All done. All finished. All silent out at 900 and a half. Are we definitely done? Thank you once more. We are selling. Selling! Selling! So, congratulations and well bid. Please join me congratulating our purchasers and our vendors here today. You've just witnessed another successful Harcourts, Rata and Co auction. Have a great weekend. We'll see you again soon. Thank you. Thanks very much, guys. Thanks, mate.
We're selling it.
Congratulations. Well bid.